The president and the vice president rushed to show a united front after scathing comments from their former Pentagon chief. Plus, Senator Marco Rubio in the center seat. This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Brett Baer. Like the aftershocks from a major earthquake, rumblings from former Defense Secretary Robert Gates' highly critical remarks about the president and vice president are reverberating through Washington tonight. The White House executed a hurry-up, damage control defense, while critics embraced the insider-level condemnation of the president's foreign policy approach. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Britt Hume with his takes on the Gates excerpts. Doug McKelway with a closer look at the way Gates describes the brazenly political motivations behind the Obama and Hillary Clinton opposition to the Iraq surge in 2007. Shannon Bream with military reaction to the book. But we begin with Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry with an administration appearing to be on spin cycle tonight. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Brett. Rare access today to the president and vice president for news photographers, but not reporters, to ask questions about these explosive allegations that are still reverberating. Great. For the first time in 5 years, President Obama and Vice President Biden today opened up their weekly lunch to cameras, just hours after details leaked from the memoirs of former Defense Secretary Robert Gates, questioning the leadership of the president and blasting the vice president's judgment. Though spokesman Jay Carney insisted the timing was a coincidence. The president was merely responding to photographers demanding more access.
You can decide for yourselves what you want to believe.
Gates writes, while the president deserves credit for surging 30,000 more troops to Afghanistan, the secretary ultimately concluded the president did not believe in the mission or in his own strategy to win, and was only focused on eventually getting out.
Has allowed our soldiers and Marines and Navy corpsmen to be killed or maimed in a war the president doesn't believe makes sense, or that he doesn't believe he can win. That is as low as any president in our history has gone.
Besides sharply defending the vice president as a trusted advisor amid Gates's claim Biden has gotten every major national security decision wrong for years, Carney insisted the president has had great faith the troops could carry out the mission after inheriting a war that was adrift.
Refocused our mission, made it clear for our troops and civilians in Afghanistan what the mission was about, why we were in Afghanistan, and why it was necessary to be clear that we weren't staying in Afghanistan on in a combat mission forever.
Republican Lindsey Graham, who was just in Afghanistan, is skeptical that Mr. Obama is committed to working out a deal to keep at least a small U.S. force to lock in security gains.
He is AWOL when it comes to leadership, and when it comes to Afghanistan, we've got a chance to get that right. He hasn't talked to the Afghan president since July.
Carney noted Mr. Obama briefly exchanged greetings with Afghan President Hamid Karzai at last month's memorial service for Nelson Mandela.
How could the two leaders not talk in months?
Look, the president and President Karzai have had discussions in the past. There's not a lot of mystery about our views on this document.
Allies of the president, meanwhile, are raising questions about a curious passage near the end of the book, where Gates writes the president ended a meeting about Iran by warning if anyone was writing memoirs, he had not made a final decision about the matter. Gates writing, quote, "I was offended by his suspicion that any of us would ever write about such sensitive matters." Of course, Gates ended up writing about a whole series of sensitive matters, which one top official told me is ironic to say the least. They're expressing shock because these officials say that since Gates ran the CIA, he's always been known for discretion, but he's clearly decided to speak out and speak out loudly. Brett?
Ed Henry live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. Reaction from the troops who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan to the words from their former boss and their commander-in-chief ranges from disappointing to unsurprising. Correspondent Shannon Bream has that part of the story.
I think this is going to be devastating to the administration.
In the wake of revelations included in former Defense Secretary Robert Gates' upcoming book that President Obama didn't, quote, believe in his own strategy with respect to Afghanistan, some soldiers who were sent to the front line say they are angry but not shocked.
It's infuriating. And I've gotten email after email and phone call today and the last couple of days from guys who have served outraged. I mean, outraged, but also it was just a confirmation of what they thought they already knew in their gut.
One former senior Army officer says, quote, "It was clear, in fact, that Obama had misgivings about both Iraq and Afghanistan. In the end, it appeared that he grudgingly thought Afghanistan was the right war, and then he saw it as an albatross around his neck." The book's revelations will also have an impact on the families of those who died serving in Afghanistan.
I think most families who read this book will be shocked at the ineptitude and the amateurishness of those at the very highest levels of our decision making.
So many families are invested in, hey, my son gave his life for this nation, and I understand that other families have done the same. But to hear that the commander-in-chief may have put their son or daughter on the line, not fully believing in the strategy he sent them there for, it's offensive, it's outrageous, it's maddening.
Some believe the trouble stems from the president's skepticism and mistrust of his own military leaders.
I think that the one thing that the American people constantly trust in is the military. It's kind of a rock, and when the administration doesn't trust in the military establishment, then you have serious issues.
There are skeptics of former Secretary Gates as well. One active duty sailor who has served 2 tours overseas telling Fox he's lost respect for Gates, asking, quote, why did he stay in office and why didn't he say anything then? Brett?
Shannon, thank you. Administration critics have jumped on what they're calling one of the most disturbing excerpts from the Gates book, his description of an exchange between President Obama and Hillary Clinton about the Iraq War and what they were willing to do and say to fuel their presidential aspirations. Correspondent Doug McKelway takes a closer look at that tonight.
In his book, Gates calls the exchange remarkable. He writes, quote, Hillary told the president that her opposition to the 2007 surge in Iraq had been political because she was facing him in the Iowa primary. The president conceded vaguely that opposition to the Iraq surge had been political. To hear the two of them making these admissions, and in front of me, was as surprising as it was dismaying.
I thought that was a shocking revelation that both Secretary Clinton and President Obama would be so candid about revealing their political motivations. And I think it's in Hillary Clinton's case, essentially a disqualifying fact in the idea that she wants to be president of the United States.
Gates' disclosure may sting the presumed 2016 Democratic frontrunner, who critics say makes no move without political calculation, and who has little to show for her globe-trotting tenure as Secretary of State.
If I were to think of one thing, I would say that she was on the national security team during the Osama bin Laden raid and his death and demise. So that would be a positive thing. But I can't think of much else beyond that.
Brooks points to her failed legacy of strained relations with Russia and the reset button that actually set relations back. New tensions in Asia, from the China-Japan dispute over the Senkaku Islands to the unpredictable moves of Kim Jong-un in North Korea. Iran's quest for a nuclear capability. Turmoil in Syria, where over 100,000 have died in the civil war. And Egypt, where the now outlawed Muslim Brotherhood remains a volatile political force. And the tragedy of Benghazi, marked by a dispute over the terrorist attack and the lingering claim by the State Department that it started as a protest against an anti-Muslim video.
We had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make?
Still, one analyst says she'll remain a political force to be reckoned with.
I don't think it's going to have any effect on Hillary's chances in 2016. Most Americans are happy that we're out of Iraq, and I don't really think it's going to be much of an issue.
While Clinton may bristle at some of Gates' characterization of her, she can also find her own defense in his memoir. He describes her as, quote, smart, tough-minded, indefatigable, funny, and a superb representative of the United States all over the world. We reached out to Secretary Clinton's office today. We have not heard back. Brett?
Okay, Doug, thank you. Let's get reaction to all of this from senior political analyst Brett Hume. Good evening, Brett.
Hi, Brett. If you can get past wondering why Bob Gates stayed as long as he did in an administration about which he harbored such profound misgivings, his revelations have an unmistakable ring of truth. The most damning of his charges, that President Obama, even as he surged 30,000 additional men and women into the war in Afghanistan, had little confidence such a strategy would work, and that he was mainly focused not on winning, but leaving. This has the ring of truth. It's because even as Mr. Obama announced the troop surge, he also announced, you'll recall, that he would begin drawing it down in 18 months. Subsequently, he said almost nothing about the conflict until he began announcing timetables for withdrawal, not just of the surge troops, but all U.S. troops. It is not uncommon for leaders to have worries and doubts about strategic choices made in wartime when things are going badly and attractive options are scarce. But that's not the same as sending soldiers to fight and die in furtherance of a strategy a leader never believed in from the start. What Mr. Obama seems to have believed instead was that after he and his party had said for years that Iraq was the wrong war and Afghanistan the right one, he could not simply leave there without making some sort of effort, even if he thought it was doomed to fail. Gates says politics was often a factor, though never decisive, in Mr. Obama's foreign policy decisions. Readers can judge for themselves if it was just a factor in this one. Brett?
We saw in Ed's piece how the administration has gone out of its way to defend Vice President Biden. That photo op today, the statement last night, all based on that one sentence in the excerpts that he's wrong, according to Gates, on all the major foreign policy issues over the last 4 decades.
Well, Gates is certainly not the first person to say that about Joe Biden. Now, look, for all the good in the man, and there's a lot of good in Joe Biden, he really was wrong about a lot of things. Go back to the 1980s. He was wrong about he wanted to keep the Pershing and cruise missiles out of Europe to support the nuclear freeze. When the first Gulf War came along, he was opposed to that war and voted against it. When the second Gulf War came along, the second Iraq War came along, he voted for that. When the surge came along, he was against that. The list goes on up into this administration. When the president was about to send the troops on the raid to kill bin Laden, he was opposed to that. So it's striking that they would defend him so vigorously when he has, clearly been wrong so very often.
All right, Britt, thank you. Coming up in just a few minutes, Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio in our center seat. If you have something you'd like to ask him, let me know at facebook.com/BrettBairSR or on Twitter @BrettBair, and you can use the hashtag Special Report. Up next, how a former detainee at Guantanamo Bay fits in with the Benghazi terror attacks. Story you heard here first. But first, here's what some of our Fox affiliates across the country are covering tonight. Fox 43 in Virginia Beach. Sad story on a Navy helicopter crashing 12 miles off the Virginia coast. 4 of the 5 crew members have been recovered, taken to the hospital, where we're just getting word that 1 has died. The search is continuing for the 5th. An Air Force helicopter crashed yesterday off the coast of England, killing 4 airmen. WNYW in New York on emails showing top aides to New Jersey Governor Chris Christie created traffic gridlock as political retribution for the town's mayor not supporting the governor's re-election campaign. 2 transit executives have already resigned over this. After canceling his only public event for the day, Christie just released a statement saying he was unaware of the inappropriate conduct of one of his staff members and that he is, quote, outraged and deeply saddened. The potential presidential candidate called the action unacceptable and says people will be held responsible. And this is a live look at Chicago from our Fox affiliate WFLD. The big story there tonight, a slight break from the record low temperatures this week. Chicago is looking for a low of 3 below with no wind chill factor tonight. A warm front. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway. From Special Report, we'll be right back.